Hi, I'm Shay, a Pokemon Worlds TCG caster, and today we're looking at possibly the worst mechanic in TCG history, Tera Stellar, and how it has flopped in a major way in the Pokemon TCG by looking and analysing every Tera Stellar card we have and just seeing why, well, they're just not very good. So let's take TPCR's description of Tera Stellar cards so we can accurately analyse them and describe why it's a massive flop. So according to TPCR Stellar Crown's press release, each Stellar Terra Pokemon EX will have a special Stellar attack with names inspired by various gemstones, which will cost 3 different types of energy to use. So keep that in mind as we look at those cards. This Stellar attack should be an absolute game changer. Well, it should be. There is something else I'll need you to keep in mind for every card, but I'm going to introduce that a little bit later on. So the first card we're going to look at here is Lapras EX. And when I first saw the translation, I thought it was a hoax because of its attack Laminar Rain, which lets you look at the top 20 cards of your deck and attach any number of basic energy cards you find there to your Pokemon. Let's not mess about. That is a silly amount of acceleration, basically ripping all energy out of the top third of your deck. And it actually has some nice synergy with its Power Splash attack, which deals 40 for each energy attached to this Pokemon. So in theory, you can pile on a ton of energy onto Lapras and then slap with Power Splash, right? Well, the 40 multiplier isn't quite strong enough, meaning you would have to have 7 energy on Lapras for it to hit 280, which is a big breakpoint for getting rid of V-Star Pokemon. But if you was playing against stage 2 EXs like Gardevoir or Charizard, you would need 9 energy. Simply too much. So with that in mind, our Laminar Rain attack would have to have close to a 50% hit rate to power up a fresh Lapras to get into Charizard slapping territory. And we really don't want our deck to consist of 50% energy cards. Those kind of decks never do well. So that rules out a Lapras only deck. Can we use Lapras to power up other stuff though? Well, that's where Lapras's unfortunate energy cost lets it down, because it needs a water, a psychic, and a metal energy to attack. So realistically speaking, we want to accelerate one of those energy types. Otherwise, we're now running 4 different energy in our deck, and that's going to get super messy. Problem is, every single one of those types has a much easier way to accelerate that type of energy. For example, Water has Batcalibur and Palkia V-Star to use Super Cold and Star Portal respectively. Psychic has Gardevoir EX's Psychic Embrace, and Xatu has its Clairvoyant Sense ability. And Metal has Metang's Metal Maker ability and Arc Alladon as well. This means no matter which way you cut it, Lapras is a really tough card to use effectively, which is why it has seen 0 meta relevant play. This next card has had murmurings of being quite good, but as you'll see, it didn't really amount to much. Galvantula EX is a stage 1 Pokemon with 260 HP and 2 attacks. The first one, Charge Web, for 2 energy, deals 110 damage, plus an extra 100 if the target is an EX or V Pokemon. This is actually pretty decent to be fair, since it picks up easy KOs on basic Vs like Regidrago V and Tealmask Ogerpon EX easily. Full Grit is an interesting attack though, discarding all 3 of your energy to deal 180 damage and item lock your opponent. We know item lock traditionally is very good in the Pokemon TCG, with cards like Seismitoad EX, Trevenant, Forest Curse, and the soon to be released Voodoo. And there is actually a way to get Full Grit rolling every single turn as well, since with Power Hourglass, you would get 1 energy back from your discard pile after you attacked, and then on your next turn, you would turn attached to the Galvantula, so now you're at 2. And in that same turn, you would use a combination of Glass Trumpet to attach to a Blissey V, who would then move the energy from the Blissey V to the active so you can use Full Grit again. If you could keep this loop up realistically, it would be very hard for your opponent to win the game. Not to mention the Joltik, who could actually attach a ton of energy as well. With both these attacks being decent, there's actually 2 ways to play Galvantula out the gates. The first way was that Glass Trumpet Power Hourglass build to abuse Full Grit, or Full Grit, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, I'm sorry. The other way was to be cheeky and use Charge Web to pick up cheap easy KOs and use the Grass type Galvantula to KO Charizard EX. Problem is, both of these versions ended up being very mid, with no real success at all, and the full gripe build was just too clunky to use effectively, and the charged web build had no way of dealing with hefty HP Pokemon once your opponent got them out. This next card, unlike Galvantula though, had 0 redeeming qualities. Flare Strike dealing 280 is actually a decent number to be fair, until you realise it's a stage 2 and Gouging Fire does 260 on a basic, and with 2 Moltres or any other multipliers like Monkey Dory, which they actually do play, you can easily out damage a stage 2 Cinderace. This is not good. And Garnet Volley sounds good on paper, dealing a massive 180 damage snipe attack to any one of your opponent's Pokemon. But since every deck that is vulnerable to bench sniping are already playing Manaphy to keep Regidrago and Radiant Greninja at bay, it is very rare you will be able to use Garnet Volley when you want to. And sure, I guess you could play Cancelling Clone to bring up Manaphy, turn off the ability and then Garnet Volley around it, but realistically, are you going to be pulling all that off, getting a stage 2 Pokemon out with 3 different energy and then get Boss Cancelling Clone as well? Seems like a complete dreamer play. Next up, we have the most successful Tera Stellar card in my opinion, Terapagos EX, but as you will see, it being a Tera Stellar made 0 difference. So Terapagos' build around attack is the unified beatdown attack, dealing 30 for each bench Pokemon you have in play. With Area 0 Underdepth letting you have 8 bench Pokemon, this tops out at 240 damage or 220 with the DTE reduction. This being paired with Dusknoir lets you quickly dispatch most things in the format with ease. You also have Noctowl to keep you running nice and smooth with its Jewel Seeker ability, and you can even play Bouffalon to make Terapagos tanky, which actually causes all sorts of problems. Crown Opal, which prevents all damage done to it by basic non-colourless Pokemon next turn. So with Radiant Bolt being a top deck in format, this should be an easy include in Terapagos decks, right? Since this would completely rule them out the game. Well, yes in theory, but once again, once you factor in that hefty attack cost, it becomes too unreliable to use. Since now, instead of just running 4 double turbo energy, you'd have to run a few grass, water and a lightning energy as well at the bare minimum, and most likely some glass trumpets to actually get them into play when you need them. This makes an already semi-clunky deck, you know, stage 2s and stage 1 lines, even more clunkier, since now you'd have a lot of dead cards in other matchups. I looked at every Terapagos deck that made top 32 or higher, and I couldn't see a single one that could use Crown Opal, because the player base just know it's not worth it. So Terapagos could have been a normal Terra Pokemon and it would have been fine. You could even remove that Stellar attack completely and it would have had 0 relevance on its success. Meaning it is a good card, but not for the Stellar reasons. But now let's take a quick look at the tool card that I mentioned earlier that can really help Tera Stellar Pokemon out. Sparkling Crystal is an A-Spec tool card that reduces the attack cost of the Terra Pokemon it is attached to by 1 energy, of any colour. This, to be fair, is pretty good, make no mistake about it, and it has seen play in the Dragapult EX archetype as the go-to A-Spec, since now you can use Phantom Dive for 1 energy. So keep this in mind when we are looking at the rest of the cards, since if you really wanted to play a Tera Stellar Pokemon deck, you could use Sparkling Crystal as your A-Spec, to make life a little bit easier for you. But even with that, bear in mind, these cards have all seen pretty much 0 play. But now we're looking at the next set of Pokemon cards that have Tera Stellar EXs in them, Surging Sparks. But we will soon see that this was not much of a needle mover. Stella's EX has 2 attacks. The first one would deal 130 damage to the active and 30 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Nice to have, but definitely not a build around by any means. And its other attack, the Stellar one, is Zircon Road, which will only deal 180 damage for those 3 different kinds of coloured energy. But after that, you can draw 5 cards. This might actually be the worst Stellar attack we have in format. Drawing 5 cards is nice, don't get it wrong, but when we have cards like Judge and Iono in format, there is no guarantee you will even get to keep those cards moving into your next turn. And even if you did, what would you use those 5 cards for? My first thought was to try and set up some Dusknoir to beef up your damage output. Problem with that is though, our main attacker only has 210 HP, so it would get KO'd easily. So using Curse Blast, which gives up more prize cards, could be a bit risky. And even then, a Curse Blast plus Zircon Road combination only hits for 310, which is just short of reaching Charizard EX, which makes using this a bit risky. And realistically, what this does is make Syllazar pretty much at all times a worse Terapagos EX, leaving there no real reason to ever try use it, which is sad because Syllazar is actually one of my favourite Pokemon. This next one's a little bit controversial though, because this card was integral to one of the best highlight moments we have seen so far this season, winning a regional championship. Alolan Exeggutor EX has 2 attacks. Tropical Frenzy deals 150 damage and lets you attach as many energy from your hand as you like to your Pokemon. This is actually a pretty fun attack, which we could actually use to power up our Stellar attack if it was good. Too bad it isn't. Flip a coin. If heads, knock out your opponent's active basic Pokemon. If tails, knock out one of your opponent's benched basic Pokemon. So if your opponent doesn't have any basic Pokemon in play, this attack is useless. Or if the only basic Pokemon your opponent has in play is a 1-prizer, this is pretty sad. It's also pretty sad if you just flip the coin the wrong way that you actually wanted. This makes an Alolan Exeggutor deck pretty bad. You cannot use this as a standalone attacker. But luckily some Regidrago players are opting to use it, since Apex Dragon can copy the attack from the discard pile, which is how it actually managed to win the Toronto Regional Championships in fantastic fashion. Well, I don't know about you, but just because another card can copy the attack, I don't think it makes the original card good. But I'll leave that up to you to decide. Without Regidrago, this card would be bulk, and even then, not all Regidrago players are opting to use it, because it is so situational. Our next card we're looking at here though is probably the worst we're looking at here today, and that is Palossand. Palossand really hasn't had a good time in the Pokemon TCG. Sand Tomb is okay, stopping your opponent retreating, but we're not going to build a deck around that, are we? Barlight Jail sounds good on paper, but when you actually deep dive it, it falls very short. So it puts damage counters on all your opponent's benched Pokemon until they have 100 HP left. So in theory, this can get a lot of damage into play, but let's actually think about this. If your opponent has a ton of high HP Pokemon on their bench, you are laughing, fair enough. But if it's a low HP deck, or even a 1-prize deck, you are now in trouble. Even if the bench has some cards on it like Lumineon V, you only deal 70 damage to it. But the biggest problem with Barlight Jail is that it does 0 damage to the active. This means even if you do wound the bench a lot, their active can just plow right through you. And that goes without saying, the attack cost is atrocious. Maybe if Palossand had a high power bench sniping attack as well, this could have been actually a good deck. But it doesn't, so it's sad times realistically. The next card we're looking at is everything Palossand wishes it was, and that is Flygon. Sonic Peridot deals 100 damage to all your opponent's EX and V Pokemon, no drawback. So if you could use this 3 times in a row, for example, you'd pretty much wipe your opponent's board clean. And if there was ever a way to boost it so you could only use this attack twice to sweep 280 HP Pokemon somehow, this would be a massive problem. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. Meaning it's probably not good enough to be a build around with the current card pool, but a very nice option to have. And in theory, this attack works really good with its first attack, Reversing Storm, which deals 130 damage and switches itself to the bench. This is a very high power strafe attack, which can be very hard to deal with, since you can strafe into safeguard Pokemon like Mimikyu, or use Klefki to turn off basic Pokemon abilities as well. But again, there's the sticking point. Right now, the best part of Flygon EX isn't the Stellar attack, it's the strafe attack, at least for now. Which means it could just be a normal EX or a normal Terra EX and it wouldn't have made a difference to this card's potential. But even after saying all that right now, Flygon EX hasn't seen any metagame success. Yet, I think there is a ton of potential for this card, personally. Tatsugiri EX. First up, Surprise Pump dealing 100 damage and shredding through all effects on your opponent's active is nice, but it's not a build around, so it's not really worth talking about in great detail. Cinnabar Lore is very fun though, letting you look at the top 10 cards of your deck, and if you find any Pokemon there, you can put them straight onto your bench. This lets you fling stage 2s, or stage 1s, into play very fast, like Dusknoir, Togekiss, or to be honest, a whole lot of ridiculous options. This is super fun and has some silly meme potential, but right now it hasn't done anything in the metagame. I think the main problem with this is that even though you might have the best of intentions to try and get a certain card into play via Cinnabar Lore, if it doesn't happen to be in the top 10 cards of your deck when you use the attack, your strategy will fall flat. And bear in mind you can use other cards like Knight Academy to help with this, but it's just making this whole process a lot harder. And the next card we're looking at similarly has a very high rolly strategy, but this time we have actually seen it have some regional level success, and that is Hydreigon EX, a very curious case, which has had a few day 2 finishes, and to be perfectly honest, those finishes are revolving around its stellar attack as well. Obsidian deals 130 damage to the active and 130 to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. This is very strong and capable of clearing an array of multiple threats very quickly for big multiple prize turns. However, it needs a monstrous 4th energy to use. This means Hydreigon decks don't even use Sparkling Crystal, they use Neo Upper Energy instead, which counts as only 2 energy while it's attached to a stage 2 Pokemon. This makes setting up a Hydreigon EX a big chore, and you have to use cards like Crispin and Dark Patch and Counter Gain to get Obsidian rolling. But if you can pull it off, you do have a strong cards in your hand, but that is a big if, and the tournament results show it. Next up we have Sylveon EX. Magical Charm reduces damage done by the defending Pokemon by 100, which is a fun effect actually, but your opponent can get around it just by switching, so it makes it a lot less useful than you would imagine. Its stellar attack, however, has a very powerful effect, letting you choose 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon and putting them straight back into their hand, but you can't use this attack 2 turns in a row. I asked Emma, who is the only person to get a day 2 placement with this card, about its use cases and if it was actually good in that event, and she said the card was genuinely terrible. I used Angelite a total of 3 times in my 12 rounds, and I lost 2 of them. The concept is great, but it's not worth the investment compared to doing other things. Angelite is really good into some matchups in theory, but I didn't get to use it much. Wiping Pidgeot, Charizard or Hydreigon is awesome. Double wiping Archeops is disgusting. And wiping energy from Drago is alright. And I think that sums it up nicely. Super high rolly and flashy, but not worth the investment. The next card is the complete opposite of this. Very low to the ground and easy to use. Ceruledge EX is starting to pick up a bit of steam in Japan, getting 5th and 10th in the Champions League event Osaka. Its Surging Flames attack deals 30 damage plus 20 for each energy card in your discard pile. So when you get like 12 energy cards in your discard pile, it's starting to one-shot stuff for 1 fire energy attachment. On a stage 1 as well, this is pretty good. Now it does have a stellar attack of course, which deals 280 damage. This is okay at ejecting V-Star Pokemon, while also getting energy in the discard pile as well. Funny thing is though, there are 11 day 2 finishes for Ceruledge EX, and none of them play the energy necessary to use Raging Amethyst. Instead, they use Palkia V-Star for an early game presence. Meaning once again, even though Ceruledge EX has seen some competitive play, it being a Tera Stellar card has been completely irrelevant. Sad times. Next up though, we have the best Tera Stellar card by far. But again, it could be argued that the attack isn't the best part of it, since some players that use this card, again, never attack with it. Pikachu EX has 2 very good qualities. Its ability, Resolute Heart, stops it getting KO'd if it was going to get KO'd but it had full HP before your opponent attacked into it. Instead, it will survive on 10 HP. This is very good, and with its attack, makes Pikachu very dangerous, since Topaz Bolt deals a massive 300 damage. This is enough to clear V-Star Pokemon straight out of the way, and if you was to use it in combination with Gravity Mountain, you can effectively reach 330 damage output, which is the magic number reaching all the way up to Charizard EX. All of this on a basic Pokemon that can't be one-shot. This makes Pikachu very hard to deal with once it starts swinging. So with that in mind, we have seen it being played a lot in Lost Box decks, because you can use Mirage Gate to power it up. We have also seen it being played in Miraidon decks. But there it can't attack, because the Miraidon players don't play the extra energy. So instead, they just use it as an activator for Area 0 Underdepth, since you have to have a Terra Pokemon in play to use it. And since it can't get one shot, it makes it the best option to use in this role, since Terapagos, which was the one we used to use for that, can get KO'd very easily. Pikachu can't, thanks to its ability. So with Pikachu EX being the most successful Tera Stellar card, I can confidently say, despite it seeing some high tier play, only one card seeing competitive play out of all of these ones, I have to say that the mechanic has been pretty bad. But let's see if prismatic evolutions can change that. but looking at the evolutions from the set, I'm not holding my breath. But let me know what you think down there in the comments. If you made it this far, please like the video and consider subscribing. It helps me out a ton, and a lot of people that are watching these videos aren't subscribed. So do us a favor, hit that sub button. And why don't you watch this video here, where I look at the worst Pokemon from every Pokemon generation and rank them. Honestly, it gets a bit fun. Real quick, I have to give a shout out to this video sponsor, Dragon Shield. They make the best accessories in the game, and if you want to get your hands on some and save yourself some money, click the link down there and use my code BURST to get 5% off, and it helps me out too. Let's get back to the video.